A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Model. Learn more at model.com.
Herman, I was looking at a map of the Red Sea this morning, and it struck me just how much the world has changed in the last few months. We are seeing something that would have been unthinkable even 5 years ago. Israel, a nation that has spent its entire existence focused on defending its immediate borders, is now looking thousands of miles to the south. It is a fundamental pivot from a doctrine of domestic defense to one of global power projection.
Herman Poppleberry here, and you have hit on something big, corn. We are witnessing a watershed moment in Israeli strategic history. We are living through what I think future historians will call the Great Levantine Pivot, Ahmed al-Sharaa. The man the world knew for a decade as Abu Muhammad al-Julani is no longer just a rebel commander or a designated terrorist in a cave. We are talking about Israel's formal recognition of Somaliland and the ongoing negotiations for what would be the first ever permanent overseas military base in the history of the Jewish state. And meanwhile, the Israel Defense Forces are sitting 15 kilometers deep inside his territory in a newly established buffer zone. It is a completely surreal reality.
It is the ultimate example of the enemy of my enemy being my, well, I do not know if we can say friend, but certainly my transactional partner. Today we are untangling this new Syrian reality. We are looking at the rise of al-Sharaa, the mechanics of this new 15-kilometer buffer zone, and the strategic doctrine that is redefining Israel's borders. This is not just about a ceasefire. It is about a fundamental remapping of the Middle East.
Herman Poppleberry here, and I have to say, this topic is the perfect follow-up to some of our recent deep dives. If you remember episode 954, where we talked about the polite fiction of Lebanon's state militia symbiosis, what we are seeing in Syria is almost the inverse. In Lebanon, the militia pretends to be a state. In Syria, the former militia leader is trying to convince the world he has actually become the state, and the stakes for Israel could not be higher.
Before we dive into the military hardware and the strike ranges, I think we need to ground this for our listeners. Right, and that transition is where we have to start. Because you cannot understand the buffer zone or the Paris talks without understanding the man now known as Ahmed al-Sharaa. Herman, you have been following his rebranding for years. This was not an overnight shift, was it?
Not at all. This is one of the most disciplined political pivots in modern history. He started as a foot soldier for Abu Musab al-Zarqawi in Iraq. Then he was the leader of Jabhat al-Nusra, the official al-Qaeda branch in Syria. But starting around 2016, he began this slow, methodical process of shedding those skins. He broke with al-Qaeda, rebranded as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, and started wearing blue button-down shirts instead of military fatigues. He began talking about pluralism and protecting minorities. By the time the Assad regime finally collapsed in late 2024, he was ready to step into the vacuum not as a caliph, but as a nationalist. In 1991, as the central government in Mogadishu collapsed into chaos, Somaliland withdrew from the Union and declared its independence.
When he sits down with his intelligence chief, Hussein Salama, are they planning a long-term peaceful state, or are they just waiting for the right moment to pivot back to their roots? They have had multiple peaceful transfers of power. They have their own currency, their own passports, and a remarkably stable security environment. They have been a de facto independent state for over 30 years, even if the United Nations hasn't officially invited them to the party yet. They have held multi-party elections, including the most recent one in November of 2024, where President Abdirahman Iro was elected. It is a stable, functioning democracy in one of the toughest neighborhoods on Earth.
It's quite an irony. They are arguably one of the most stable democracies in East Africa, Yet they have existed in this kind of diplomatic limbo for 3 decades, until now. When Israel recognized them in December of 2025, it wasn't just a random diplomatic gesture. It was an acknowledgement of a reality that has been true on the ground for a generation. Israel is essentially saying, we see you, we recognize your stability, and we want to partner with you.
There is a historical resonance here that I think our regular listeners will appreciate. We can call it the 1960 echo. As you mentioned, when Somaliland first became independent from Britain in June of 1960, Israel was actually one of the first countries to recognize them. There were even telegrams exchanged between the leaders at the time, with Golda Meir, who was the foreign minister then, sending her congratulations.
That historical context matters, Corn. It provides a layer of legitimacy to what is happening now. Oh, it is incredible. They are calling it the Big Trench. It is a 20-mile-long anti-tank ditch and berm system that is designed to be impassable for heavy vehicles. But it is more than just a hole in the ground. It is integrated with what the military calls the seismic sensor array. These sensors can detect underground tunneling or heavy vehicle movement from miles away. They have also systematically destroyed every piece of Syrian military infrastructure within that zone, every bunker, every observation post, every abandoned base that the Syrian Arab army left behind.
Regarding the pushback, the Somali government in Mogadishu is not happy. But this creates a very strange diplomatic situation. We are holding sovereign Syrian land, beyond the Golan Heights, which we already annexed, and yet we are in active, direct negotiations with the Syrian government in Paris. How does al-Shara square that with his nationalist rhetoric? He is the guy who is supposed to be restoring Syrian dignity, and yet he is presiding over a country with an Israeli-occupied buffer zone.
That is where the Paris talks in January 2026 get so interesting. The Syrian Foreign Minister, Assad al-Shaibani, has been meeting with Israeli officials, including our ambassador to the United States, Yechiel Leiter, and the messaging coming out of Damascus is fascinating. They are framing the buffer zone not as a permanent loss, but as a temporary security necessity caused by the instability of the transition.
The Houthis have turned that strait into a primary front in Iran's shadow war against the West and Israel. We talked about this back in episode 1009, when we analyzed the strikes against the IRGC's oil empire. The doctrine has shifted. Israel realized that they can't just sit back in the Mediterranean and wait for the missiles to arrive at the port of Eilat. They have to be present at the source. They have to be able to project power into the southern Red Sea to protect their economic lifeblood.
If you are an Israeli military planner, Berbera looks like a gold mine. You see a deep-water port that has already been modernized thanks to nearly $800 million of investment from DP World, the giant logistics company based in Dubai. You see an existing infrastructure that can handle heavy equipment and sophisticated logistics. You aren't starting from scratch in a desert, you are plugging into a multi-billion-dollar commercial hub.
It also has a massive runway. Berbera has one of the longest runways in Africa. It was actually a space shuttle emergency landing site back in the day. For Israel, this isn't just a place to park a couple of patrol boats. This is a platform for persistent surveillance and, if necessary, rapid strike capabilities. We are talking about the ability to station advanced radar systems, long-range drones like the Hermes 900, and even fighter jets if the situation warrants it.
260 kilometers. Let's put that in perspective for the listeners. That is less than the distance from Jerusalem to Eilat. If you have advanced radar systems and unmanned aerial vehicles stationed in Berbera, you aren't just reacting to Houthi launches, you are watching them fuel the missiles on the launch pad. You are seeing the Iranian dhows bringing in the components in real time. You are essentially moving the front line from your own border to the enemy's doorstep.
It shrinks the kill chain. For those who don't know the term, the kill chain is the process of finding a target, fixing its location, tracking it, and then engaging it. Right now, if a threat emerges in the southern Red Sea, Israel has to coordinate with international task forces or send assets from a long way off. That takes time. With a permanent footprint in Somaliland, that latency drops to almost zero. They can maintain a permanent eyes-on-target posture over the entire Bab el-Mandeb Strait.
I'm curious about the operational model here, Corn. Because, as we said, Israel has never done this before. They don't have a string of overseas bases like the United States or the British. How do they integrate into a place like Somaliland without looking like an occupying force?
I think they're looking closely at the UAE model. The United Arab Emirates has been the pioneer in Berbera. They were the ones who brought in DP World to rebuild the port. They have already established a security presence there to protect their commercial interests. Israel can basically plug into that existing framework. It is a strategic partnership that leverages commercial infrastructure for security outcomes. It is a much lighter footprint than building a massive, sovereign base from scratch. It is more about access and interoperability.
That makes sense. It is the Berbera model versus the Djibouti model. In Djibouti, you have this crowded, high-friction environment where the United States, China, France, Italy, and Japan all have bases. It is a den of spies and electronic surveillance. If you are the Israeli Mossad or the Air Force, do you really want to be sharing a fence line with a Chinese naval base? Probably not. By choosing Somaliland, Israel gets a clean slate. They get a partner that is hungry for recognition and will give them much more favorable terms and better operational security.
It is the difference between being one of 10 tenants in a crowded apartment building versus being the preferred guest in a private villa. Somaliland needs Israel for legitimacy and security assistance, so they are going to be much more accommodating than a place like Djibouti that is already playing all sides against each other. And let's not overlook the internal politics of Somaliland. President Abdirahman Iro is continuing the work of his predecessor, Muse Bihi Abdi, but he is doing it with a clear mandate. He knows that the path to international recognition runs through Jerusalem and Washington.
It is a bold play for them. They are essentially betting their entire future on this alignment. If it works, they become the indispensable hub of the Red Sea. If it fails, they have a very angry Somalia and potentially other hostile regional actors at their doorstep. But that is where the Israeli security guarantee comes in. If Israel is building a base there, they aren't just protecting their own ships. They are effectively underwriting the security of the Somaliland state. It is a symbiotic relationship. Israel gets the geographic vantage point it needs to counter Iran, and Somaliland gets a powerful ally that can provide everything from drone technology to intelligence training.
We also have to talk about Ethiopia in this context. Ethiopia is the silent giant in this room. They are a landlocked country of over 120 million people, and they are desperate for reliable sea access. For years they have been dependent on Djibouti, which has been a major bottleneck for them. Ethiopia recently signed its own deal with Somaliland for port access and a naval base. So you'll have this emerging nexus, Israel, Ethiopia, and the UAE, all centering their regional strategy on Somaliland.
It creates a new axis of power that bypasses the traditional centers like Mogadishu or even Cairo to some extent. It is a total realignment. And for Ethiopia, having Israel as a security partner in the same corridor is a huge win. It guarantees the security of their trade routes. But you can see why this makes Egypt nervous. Egypt views the Red Sea as its private lake, and they are already in a tense standoff with Ethiopia over the Nile Dam. Now they see an Israeli-Ethiopian-Somaliland alliance forming at the southern gate of the Red Sea. That is a lot for Cairo to digest.
This highlights the second-order effects of these diplomatic moves. It is never just about one base or one recognition. It ripples through the entire geopolitical fabric. We mentioned the UAE, who are clearly aligned with this move, but what about the risk of sovereignty friction? You have the Somali government in Mogadishu condemning this today. How serious is that? Could we see a conflict between Mogadishu and Hargeisa, the capital of Somaliland, that sucks Israel into a local civil war?
That is the primary risk. Somalia still claims Somaliland as part of its sovereign territory. They have been increasingly vocal about it, and they have received significant military support from Turkey. Turkey has its own massive base in Mogadishu called TURKSOM, so you have a potential proxy conflict brewing. If Mogadishu tries to force the issue, perhaps by stirring up internal trouble in Somaliland or seeking support from Israel's enemies like Iran, it could get very messy very quickly.
And al-Shabaab is still a very real presence in southern Somalia. If they see an Israeli base being built in the north, that becomes a huge target for them. It could turn Somaliland into a front for the kind of jihadi terrorism that they have largely managed to keep out of their territory so far. The security requirements for an Israeli base in that environment will be extreme. We are talking about multi-layered missile defenses, elite special forces for perimeter security, and a massive intelligence effort to monitor any movement across the border.
It is not a low-cost endeavor, but as we often say on this show, the cost of doing nothing is even higher. If Israel doesn't secure that strait, their economy is at the mercy of whatever drone the Houthis decide to launch that day. The price of fuel, the price of consumer goods, everything is tied to those shipping lanes. It is a calculated risk, and the timing is not accidental. Israel is moving now because they see a window of opportunity. The global order is in flux, the regional alliances are shifting, and Somaliland is ready to deal.
It is about seizing the initiative. I think it also says a lot about the confidence of the current Israeli leadership. To make a move this bold, to recognize a state that no one else has officially recognized, and to plan an overseas base that requires a very clear strategic vision and a willingness to ignore the inevitable screeching from the international community. The African Union is likely to be upset because they generally hate the idea of changing colonial borders. They worry it will set a precedent for every other separatist movement on the continent.
Israel is going to have to do some heavy lifting in terms of diplomacy to prevent this from turning into a PR disaster at the United Nations. But again, if you have the UAE and Ethiopia on your side, that is a lot of regional weight. And if the results on the ground are a more secure Red Sea and a decrease in Houthi attacks, it becomes very hard for the critics to argue with success. Results have a way of silencing the theorists.
I want to go back to the military calculus for a second. We're talking about countering the Houthis, but is this purely defensive? When I hear about an overseas base, I think about offensive capabilities. Could we see Israeli jets taking off from Berbera to strike targets in Yemen or even further afield?
That is the big question. Officially, I'm sure it will be framed as a maritime security and counterterrorism hub. But the capability is what matters. If you have the infrastructure to support advanced fighter aircraft or long-range strike drones only 260 kilometers from your primary adversary's territory, the deterrent effect is massive. It reminds me of what we discussed in episode 1010 regarding the British bases in Cyprus. Those sovereign base areas, Akrotiri and Dikelia, allow the United Kingdom to project power across the entire Middle East without needing permission from anyone.
Israel is looking for that same kind of strategic autonomy. They don't want to have to ask for flyover rights or refueling tankers every time they need to deal with a threat in the Bab el-Mandeb. It is about reducing dependency. We covered that theme of non-dependency back in episode 474. In the modern age, if you can't secure your own trade routes, you aren't truly sovereign. Israel saw what happened when the Houthis started hijacking ships and firing ballistic missiles at Eilat. They realized that relying on a decentralized international coalition was a gamble they didn't want to take long term.
From a pro-American perspective, this is a net positive for the United States too. Even though the United States has been cautious about official recognition of Somaliland because of the whole territorial integrity issue with Somalia, having a stable pro-Western ally like Israel holding the line in the Red Sea takes a huge burden off the United States Navy. The United States has its hands full in the Pacific and Eastern Europe. If Israel can take the lead on securing the southern Red Sea corridor, that is a massive strategic win for the entire Western alliance.
It fits perfectly into the logic of regional partners stepping up and taking responsibility for their own backyard. It is the Abraham Accords logic applied to maritime security. We talked about this in episode 928, how the Abraham Accords weren't just a one-off deal, but a foundational shift. This Somaliland move is the next logical step. It is expanding that circle of stability down into the whole of Africa. It is also a direct challenge to the Iranian strategy of encirclement. For years, Tehran has been trying to build a ring of fire around Israel. By establishing a base in Somaliland, Israel is essentially performing a counter-encirclement. They are putting themselves on Iran's southern flank.
It is a high-stakes game of geopolitical chess. So, let's look at the practical takeaways for our listeners. If you are tracking this, what are the key things to watch over the next few months? First, watch the timeline for the first permanent Israeli personnel deployment at the Berbera site. We have seen reports of security officials surveying the area, but the actual arrival of boots on the ground will be the point of no return.
Second, keep a very close eye on the relationship between Mogadishu and Ankara. If Turkey decides to back Somalia's claims more aggressively, perhaps by providing more advanced drones or naval support to the Somali government, that could create a very dangerous friction point. And third, I would say, watch the commercial side. If we see more international shipping companies shifting their hubs to Berbera, it provides a layer of commercial protection for the military base. The more the world's economy is tied to the stability of Somaliland, the harder it is for anyone to justify attacking it.
The DP World investment is the logistical backbone of this entire project. It is a perfect example of how private capital and national security interests can align to reshape an entire region. It is also a reminder that the world is not just a collection of United Nations recognized states. There are these pockets of stability and capability, like Somaliland, that can become major players if they find the right partners. It is a more fluid, more realistic way of looking at geopolitics.
It feels like we are watching the birth of a new Red Sea security architecture. It is not just about Israel and the Houthis, it is about who controls the gates of global trade for the next 50 years. It is a testament to the resilience and the strategic depth of the Jewish state. From a tiny country fighting for its life in 1948 to a regional power projecting strength into the Horn of Africa in 2026. It is a remarkable trajectory.
It certainly is. And I want to thank Daniel for sending this one in. It is exactly the kind of deep dive we love doing here. It really touches on all the themes we enjoy: history, geography, military technology, and the messy reality of international relations.
I agree. And to our listeners, if you are enjoying these deep dives into the weird and wonderful world of geopolitics, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people find the show and helps us keep this collaboration going. We are also on Telegram. Just search for My Weird Prompts and you'll get a notification every time a new episode drops.
It makes a huge difference. And if you want to find more episodes, including the ones we referenced today like our analysis of the IRGC oil strikes or the Cyprus bases, head over to myweirdprompts.com. You can find our full RSS feed there and all the different ways to subscribe. We love hearing from you, so don't be shy about reaching out through the contact form on the website if you have a topic you want us to tackle.
This has been a great one, Herman. I feel like I need to go buy a map of the Horn of Africa now and start marking it up. I'm already looking at the distance between Berbera and the Iranian coast next, but that might be a topic for another day.
I look forward to it. This has been My Weird Prompts.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We will catch you in the next one.
Take care.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow to